Today, we're going to break down the 5 worst revenge deaths ever recorded. From a quiet roommate who spent weeks studying a man's predictable nights before making his move, to a business partner who watched a man struggle for air on a garage floor. A confrontation where the deadliest choice was doing nothing at all. It was June 2017 on the outskirts of a mid-sized city in coastal Georgia. The apartment complex sat on a tree-lined street in a part of town that stayed quiet on most nights. Units turned over regularly and neighbors rarely learned each other's names. Curtis Habb was 38 years old and worked as a freelance IT contractor, mostly remotely, which meant he rarely had a reason to leave before noon. He kept irregular hours, drank heavily most evenings, and took prescription sleep medication before bed without variation. He was charming in casual settings, but people who knew him longer told a different story. He used his size to intimidate, dismissed complaints from women as overreactions, and leveraged professional connections to discredit anyone who challenged him. 2 years earlier, a woman had filed a formal complaint against Curtis in another state. She was 21, had known him through a shared workplace, and watched her case dismissed after his attorney introduced her prior mental health records into the proceeding. The woman was Dalton Pruitt's younger sister. Following the dismissal, she left her job, withdrew from daily life, and moved back into her parents' home. She was still there when Dalton relocated to Georgia. Dalton was 29 and worked nights at a distribution center. He found Curtis's rental listing through a shared housing platform and responded directly. Curtis had no reason to connect him to anyone from his past. Dalton moved into the spare room in early 2017 and said little about himself. Over the first 2 months, Dalton observed Curtis's nightly routine without deviation. Curtis drank 4 to 6 beers most evenings, took a sleep tablet around 11, and was deeply unconscious by midnight. He also noticed that on nights Curtis drank less, his sleep was lighter. On the chosen night, Dalton left an extra 6-pack in the shared refrigerator without comment. Curtis finished most of it before taking his tablet and going to bed. Investigators later focused on Dalton's movements that night. Records showed he had purchased a large roll of industrial plastic wrap from a hardware store 3 towns over, paying cash. Based on Curtis's condition and the timing of Dalton's movements, investigators believed Dalton may have entered Curtis's room sometime after midnight. Their reconstruction suggested the plastic wrap could have been pulled tightly across Curtis's face and layered repeatedly, sealing over his mouth and nose and preventing him from drawing in air. Given the alcohol and sleep medication in his system, Curtis would likely have been unable to fully resist. His breathing would have grown increasingly shallow over the next several minutes before stopping entirely. Investigators believe the material was later removed and discarded before Dalton left the apartment around 2:15 that morning. The following afternoon, shortly after 2 p.m., Dalton told investigators he had not seen Curtis leave his room all day. He said he knocked on the bedroom door and, after receiving no response, opened it. Curtis was lying in bed and unresponsive. Dalton called for assistance and waited outside the building. Curtis's death was initially attributed to respiratory depression caused by the combined effect of alcohol and prescription sleep medication, consistent with his documented habits and toxicology results. Dalton cooperated with investigators and provided a calm account of the previous evening. No physical evidence was found in the apartment. Several weeks later, a forensic consultant reviewing the case noted subtle petechial hemorrhaging around Curtis's eyes, findings that did not fully align with medication and alcohol-related respiratory depression alone. Investigators reviewed Dalton's movements and traced a cash purchase of industrial plastic wrap at a hardware store to a customer matching his description, supported by partial footage from a nearby camera. His attorney successfully challenged the footage as insufficient for identification and argued the forensic findings were still consistent with natural causes given Curtis's documented habits. Without physical evidence from the apartment or the disposal site, investigators could not establish what had happened inside Curtis's room that night. The case eventually stalled. Dalton was never formally charged, and the death was later reclassified as undetermined within the period covered by available records. A man who spent decades making others feel worthless finally met someone who had been waiting years to return the favor. In a quiet Ohio suburb, a woman with a different kind of patience was already 3 visits into a plan that would take everything from the inside out. It was March 2016 in a mid-sized city in northern Ohio. A quiet residential neighborhood sat far from the main roads, where most residents kept to themselves. One of the small single-story houses had been occupied by the same resident for over 20 years, and aside from the occasional neighbor waving from a driveway, almost nobody came to visit. Harlan was 71 years old and had spent 4 decades working as a warehouse supervisor. He was not well liked. People who worked under him remembered him as someone who used his position to make others feel small. He targeted vulnerable employees, particularly young women in their first jobs, belittling them publicly in front of coworkers, denying them advancement, and making their daily routines miserable. When they resigned, he moved on without a second thought. By his late 60s, Harlan had retired and largely withdrawn from public life. He lived alone, drank regularly, and managed chronic acid reflux that had bothered him for years. He kept the same brand of antacid tablets in his kitchen cabinet and took them every morning without examining them closely, relying on habit and poor eyesight. His routine rarely changed, including a daily walk to a nearby diner where he sat at the same corner table and ordered the same breakfast. The staff there had known him for years. One of the people Harlan had targeted years earlier was Marta Selby, now 32. She had been 19 when she started working under him at a logistics warehouse. After 2 years of public humiliation and professional sabotage, Harlan publicly accused her of tampering with outgoing shipments. The accusation took 14 months to resolve, drained her savings, and during the proceedings, she lost custody of her 4-year-old daughter to a family member. Their relationship never fully recovered. In late 2015, Marta located Harlan through public records and spent several weeks observing his routine before approaching him as a former colleague passing through the area. He welcomed the visit without suspicion. She returned twice more, and on the 3rd visit emptied his antacid bottle and replaced the tablets with a powdered sulfamic acid descaling compound purchased with cash from a cleaning supply store 2 towns over. The white powder resembled crushed antacid tablets closely enough that someone relying on habit and poor eyesight would not notice the difference. She returned the bottle to the cabinet and did not come back again. Harlan took his usual dose the following morning before leaving for the diner, swallowing the tablets with water as he always did. He felt a sharp, burning sting as he swallowed, but assumed it was a different batch. Within minutes, a burning sensation spread through his throat and chest, but he dismissed it as another flare of his chronic reflux and continued his walk to the diner. By the time he reached his usual table, the pain had worsened, and each sip of water made it sharper. A waitress who had served him for years noticed he was sweating heavily and gripping the table. He could not answer when she approached. Within the hour, the caustic damage to his esophagus had progressed enough that breathing became labored and painful. Harlan slid partially from his chair and grabbed the table for support. 2 other customers moved toward him. His face was pale, his breathing shallow and irregular, and he was unable to speak. The waitress stayed beside him while another customer called for help. Harlan remained conscious throughout, aware of the people around him, but unable to respond. He was taken from the diner and died several hours later from severe caustic burns to his esophagus and upper stomach lining. The antacid bottle recovered from his kitchen tested positive for sulfamic acid, a descaling compound commonly used in industrial cleaning products. A cleaning supply store 2 towns over confirmed a cash purchase of the same product 10 days earlier by a customer matching Marta's description, supported by partial security footage. Neighbor accounts placed a woman matching her appearance at his home multiple times in the weeks before his death. Marta was identified, questioned, and charged with first-degree murder. Under Ohio law, the charge carried a mandatory sentence of 15 years to life, with the possibility of parole. Available records indicate trial proceedings were ongoing at the close of the period covered. Harlan too without a second thought and never made it back from the diner. Meanwhile, in western Pennsylvania, a son who had just watched his entire inheritance handed to someone else was driving home that night with knock his usual dose that morning. Wing left to lose. It was the winter of 2011 in a mid-sized Rust Belt city in western Pennsylvania. Old money there didn't look like much from the outside. Modest houses, sensible cars, savings built over 40 years at the same job. the kind of wealth accumulated slowly through steady work. Raymond Salt was 67 and had built a small commercial cleaning company into an operation with 14 employees and 3 municipal contracts. He was a widower with 2 children, a daughter, Cara, 39, and a son, Devin, 36. He had told both of them that everything he'd built would be split down the middle when the time came. Cara moved back after a divorce and gradually became Raymond's primary caretaker as his health declined. Devin lived 4 hours away and visited when distance allowed. 2 years in, Raymond was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia. His cognition declined unevenly, some weeks nearly normal, others noticeably impaired. Cara arranged a new estate attorney, one she selected, and accompanied her father to every appointment. Within months, Raymond signed a revised will. Cara received the business, the house, and nearly all liquid assets. Devin received a savings bond worth $4,000. He was not informed that the meeting had taken place. When the will was read, Devin sat silently in the attorney's office for several minutes. He later consulted 2 independent specialists who concluded that Raymond's cognitive state at the time of signing raised serious questions about his testamentary capacity. Devin filed a legal challenge. Cara retained an attorney and waited. A relative later arranged a family meeting, hoping to ease the conflict. In front of 3 people, Cara told Devin their father had known exactly what he was doing and that Devin should have been around more if he wanted to matter. Devin drove home that night and did not sleep. 7 months of legal fees had drained most of his savings, and the person he blamed for it had just smiled at him like the outcome was already settled. Devin knew the cleaning business operated out of a single-story equipment facility on the edge of an industrial lot. He had visited it with his father as a teenager and knew the electrical panel had been a recurring concern. Among his father's belongings was a spare key to the facility that Cara had never thought to retrieve. Cara worked late alone every Thursday for payroll. Devin arrived after dark and confirmed her car was already in the lot, interfered with wiring behind the main electrical panel, and fed a length of pipe through the exterior door's handle bracket, leaving the interior handle operable, but the door unable to swing outward under pressure. He drove away. The fire started at approximately 9:40 that night. The first responding crew reported flames visible through the front windows and smoke venting heavily through the roofline on arrival. The facility had one secondary access point at the rear. A firefighter who entered through it found Cara on the floor of the main storage room, closest to the jammed exterior door, the only exit she would have known. Investigators later noted the exterior door's handle bracket showed stress marks consistent with repeated forceful engagement from the inside. She had been conscious long enough to understand the door wasn't going to open. The medical examiner later determined that Cara died from a smoke inhalation and thermal injuries sustained during the fire. The fire was initially ruled accidental. 4 months later, a second review identified the pipe bracket and the wiring interference. Devin had used his own car, his father's key, and had called a friend from the road that night, in a state the friend described simply as hollow. That call was enough. He was arrested later that year and charged with first-degree murder and arson. Prosecutors showed that Devin had confirmed Cara was inside the building before blocking the exit, removing any argument that her death had been accidental. He was convicted on both counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole under Pennsylvania law. During sentencing, the judge noted that Devin's legal challenge to the will had not been without merit. An independent review during the trial found the revised will highly irregular, given Raymond's documented cognitive decline, and the estate would likely have been successfully contested within the year. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been here before, you already know what's coming next. Either way, hit subscribe so you don't miss it. It was February 2018 in Denver, Colorado. The commercial district sat several blocks from the main stretch of downtown, a cluster of mid-rise office buildings that filled up on weekday mornings and emptied out by early evening. Most people who worked there kept to themselves between floors. Naomi Sheld was 33 years old and worked as a marketing strategist at a boutique brand agency. She was efficient and precise and had positioned herself well within the agency over several years. People who worked alongside her remembered her differently. She took credit for junior colleagues' work in client presentations, manipulated internal documentation during disputes, and used her relationship with agency leadership to sideline anyone she viewed as a threat. One of those people was Tilda Roeck, 33, a childhood friend who had landed at the same agency in their mid-20s. In 2013, they developed a brand pitch together over several months. When the time came to present it, Naomi submitted it under her name alone. The client signed, and Naomi's career accelerated while Tilda was quietly pushed out within the year. The fallout was severe. Within months of leaving the agency, Tilda experienced a depressive episode that required several months of inpatient treatment. During that period, she lost her apartment and the relationship she had been in for 4 years. By the time she was discharged, she was rebuilding her life from the scratch, taking junior roles she was overqualified for, while Naomi continued advancing at the agency on work they had originally developed together. In early 2017, Tilda contacted Naomi under the pretense of reconnecting after the death of a mutual friend. Naomi welcomed the outreach without suspicion. Over the following months, Tilda visited the office occasionally, bringing coffee or lunch and helping with small tasks. Her presence became familiar enough that Naomi eventually gave her a spare access card for days she was tied up in meetings, and other staff paid little attention to her visits. Investigators later examined Tilda's access to Naomi's office routine. Records showed she had spent months researching serotonin syndrome, a condition that can occur when certain supplements are combined with antidepressant medications and push serotonin levels beyond what the body can regulate. In severe cases, the reaction can become fatal. Naomi had been prescribed a standard SSRI, and investigators noted that the addition of certain over-the-counter serotonergic supplements could create a dangerous interaction. Purchase records showed that 2 supplements commonly used in wellness products had been ordered online in the months before Naomi's death. Investigators believed small amounts may have been introduced into Naomi's protein powder through the office drawer where she kept it, a drawer Tilda had access to during her visits. Their theory was that small amounts were added during earlier visits before the concentration was increased shortly before the incident. Naomi never reported noticing anything unusual. In the weeks before the incident, Naomi mentioned to a colleague that she had been feeling unusually warm and restless during the day. She attributed it to caffeine and cut back on coffee. She said the same during a conversation with Tilda, who suggested she try to get more rest. On a Thursday morning in February, Naomi prepared her protein shake at her desk, as she did every day. Within about 90 minutes, she appeared visibly unwell, sweating heavily and struggling to focus on a routine task. She stood to walk toward the restroom and collapsed in the open area between desks. 2 colleagues reached her within seconds, while another called for assistance. Her body temperature was dangerously elevated, her muscles rigid, and she experienced severe tremors lasting several minutes. Naomi remained conscious, but unable to control the movements. She was transported to the hospital. Naomi died later that day from complications associated with serotonin syndrome. Building access logs and colleague accounts confirmed that Tilda had visited the office the afternoon before the incident. The protein powder in Naomi's desk later tested positive for added serotonergic compounds. Tilda was interviewed twice and identified as a person of interest, but investigators were unable to obtain a confession or direct evidence linking her to the purchase or placement of the supplements. The case stalled and no charges were filed. The investigation remained open within the period covered by available records. Everything Naomi built was gone, and the person responsible had never looked back. In Las Vegas, a business partnership built on stolen income was about to end in an empty parking garage, and only one of them would walk out. It was October 2017 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The underground parking structure beneath a commercial property in the city's outer district sat 2 levels below street level and had no functioning camera system. Aldous Fenrick was 63 years old and had spent 3 decades acquiring and developing commercial real estate across Nevada and Arizona. He restructured verbal agreements after the fact, and used litigation as a pressure tool against smaller partners, cultivating a reputation that discouraged most people from pursuing losses against him. Gareth Scud was 51 and had been Aldis's development partner on a commercial property since 2015. He had invested the majority of his personal savings into the venture, taken out a second mortgage on his home, and structured his entire financial position around the expected returns. He had a daughter in college whose tuition he was covering and a wife managing a recent health diagnosis. The project was not a business decision for Gareth. It was everything he had. In early 2017, Gareth discovered that Aldis had been redirecting rental income into a private management company he controlled exclusively, an arrangement that had never appeared in their partnership documentation. Two attorneys confirmed recovery would be expensive and uncertain. Gareth could not afford to pursue it. By mid-2017, he had missed 2 mortgage payments and withdrawn his daughter from her college program without telling her why. His wife's medical expenses were going unpaid. He contacted Aldis in October and requested a private meeting. Aldis suggested the garage level of the property after hours, a location they had used before for walkthroughs. Gareth arrived first with documentation of the diverted income, intending to present it and demand a resolution. He had no plan beyond the confrontation itself. Aldis arrived and reviewed the documents without engaging their substance, told Gareth the figures were being misread, and moved toward the exit. Gareth stepped forward and grabbed his arm. Aldis shoved him hard with both hands. Gareth stumbled, recovered, and grabbed Aldis's jacket. In the struggle that followed, both men moved in a tight space between parked vehicles and a concrete wall. Aldis grabbed Gareth by the collar and drove him sideways. The momentum shifted, and Aldis lost his footing, his throat making direct contact with the upper edge of a concrete utility shelf bracket fixed to the wall at shoulder height. Aldis's hands went to his throat. He made no sound. The impact caused catastrophic damage to his larynx, obstructing his airway. Gareth stepped back. Aldis slid down the wall and settled at its base, his chest moving in increasingly shallow intervals for less than 2 minutes. He was conscious for most of it, his eyes open and fixed on Gareth, fully aware of what was happening and unable to stop it. Gareth stood and watched. He did not call for help. A maintenance worker at the far end of the garage had heard the impact, opened his door several minutes later, observed Gareth standing alone near a figure on the ground, and retreated back inside. Gareth left the garage without calling for assistance. The maintenance worker contacted emergency services after Gareth's vehicle exited. Gareth was identified through entry logs and interviewed the following morning. He described the contact as mutual and unintentional. The maintenance worker's account contradicted him directly, and a medical examiner confirmed the laryngeal injury was consistent with directed impact against a hard edge rather than an incidental fall. Gareth was charged with involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that the confrontation and resulting impact constituted a reckless act that led directly to Aldis's death. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in state prison. He had served just over a year at the close of the period covered by available records. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.